Hello, this is Artem from Xerial, and in today's video I'm going to share the exciting new feature coming to CAD Plus toolset. We are introducing Macro Plus, which is a completely new platform which enables a lot of advanced features for the macro developers. Despite VBA macros being obsolete technology, it's still by far the most popular type of application when it comes to automation of SOLIDWORKS and other CAD applications. Macro Plus enables several useful features when it comes to development of macros, such as arguments, expression in arguments, user results, error handling, etc. This allows to concentrate on the development of the actual feature within the macro and to not overcomplicate the macro code. In this video, I will demonstrate several scenarios of how to automate your workflow using Toolbar Plus, Batch Plus, and Batch Plus for SOLIDWORKS PDM Professional. In the first video, I will demonstrate how to create a macro from scratch, which can export the active file into multiple formats with a flexible naming to include, for example, the original file name or some custom properties such as description or part number. Let's start a macro recorder by clicking that button. And now we can just record the operation of saving the file into the foreign format. So let's call the save as operation. You can just select the output folder and the file type you want to save. So let it be IGES, specify the name, click save. So now this operation complete, and we can stop our macro recorder and save the macro and inspect the code. So let's name it export and click save. So here is a code which was recorded for this save as operation. So as you can see, this macro is just a few lines of code, where the most important line is being this one, which actually saves the file into the foreign format. So you just need to supply the output file path, including the extension, and SOLIDWORKS API will figure out what translator to call to create this output. But the complexity usually starts when it is required to compose that output file path. So user might want to include some extra data into the file naming. So for example, it might be a file name, configuration name, or maybe the values of custom properties. And then this needs to be implemented in a macro. It becomes rather complex, and you need to have an experience developing those scripts in order to produce the corresponding source code. It becomes even more complex if you want to add some additional features. So for example, you might want to check that your current document is either part or assembly and forbid output of this macro for the drawings or where there is no files opened in SOLIDWORKS. Furthermore, you might want to automate the output itself. Instead of clicking the button, you want to create these files automatically whenever you save your part or assembly. This will overcomplicate your macro, and at this stage where I usually suggest not to use VBA macros but instead start using SOLIDWORKS add-ins, as those are way more sophisticated and powerful. But as we have discovered before, the actual operation which produces our output is just the one line of API, which is save as, and this is perfect fit for a macro. So let me show you how Macro Plus in Plus toolset allows you to simplify this background work and still make your macro useful and powerful. I will start by activating the Toolbar Plus module in CAD Plus toolset, and I'm just going to drag and drop that macro which we just saved into this panel. So here I can give a name of my macro and can give a name of a toolbar of a group of my macros. So let's call it my tools, and my macro is going to be called export, and I can assign some description to that macro. So let's call it export active documents to MFG format. I can assign icon. I can just use a PNG file with a transparent background of any size, and here I can pass some arguments, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later. I can also specify some triggers. So for example, I want to call this macro by button click, and I can say where this macro can work, parts and assemblies, and where this macro should be hosted in menu, tab box, and toolbar. One of the main limitations of VBA macros in SOLIDWORKS is an ability to pass user argument to the macro itself, which makes the macros hard to reuse, and you will have to create some user interface, pop-ups, message boxes, input boxes in order to collect input for the macro, or instead you can just use a constant in the macro. So if user wants to configure and change some parameters, the macro needs to be edited in order to modify this constant. Macro Plus overcomes this limitation, and now you can pass arguments to your VBA macro in order to configure its behavior. As far as our export macro concerned, it is a good idea to pass the argument with an output file pass to the macro itself, so it can just load that from the user and export the file into the nominated location. One of the major changes in the new version of Cut+ is that now you can pass in expressions into your arguments, and those expressions can contain some variables. So instead of just typing the pass, we can use one of the available placeholders. So for example, we can use pass placeholder and can nominate what type of pass we want to use. For example, the folder pass of the input file. Then we can use a slash to create a subfolder, and now we can also load some other data from the file itself. So for example, the value of custom property, part number. We can also use any other placeholder. So let's add another custom property. Now it's going to be called description. And finally, we can just specify the extension for our file. And this is going to be resolved dynamically by Cut+ and passed as a result string to our macro. So that our macro developers do not need to worry about extracting custom properties, folder paths, etc. from the file itself. Let's now save this configuration of a toolbar, and let's modify our macro to extract the value of an argument and pass it to save as API. So let's open this VBA macro. If you want to work with macro plus functionality, we can add the type library to our macro, which is located in the installation folder of Cut+ toolset. So let's go to Tools References, click on Browse, navigate to installation folder of Cut+ toolset, and let's find the corresponding type library. It's called Xerial Cut+ macrorunner.tlb. This one describes the APIs available for you as a part of Macro+. We now can simply extract the value of our macro operation, and the line I'm just typing will be pretty much the same across all of your macros. So just going to connect to Macro+ feature to create an instance of Operation Manager and actually extract the operation from the register. So you just need to pass an instance of SOLIDWORKS, and now you can find the information within your operations. For example, you can get the value of an argument passed by the user. So you can just go to arguments, and let's select the first one and just call get value. The out file pass variable is going to contain the resolved value or based on our expression, which we can just pass into save as API. Let's save our macro and restart SOLIDWORKS to have our macro loaded in toolbar and command type boxes. So you can see our macro is there, it has its name and description as per the definition. It is also available in the menu. So let's debug it, and if we want to debug our macro, we can just open that for edit, and we just need to add debug assert line, so our macro is going to break when it's run. Let's click the button on the toolbar and debug our macro. So you can see VBA editor has been opened, so we can just debug step by step. Let's inspect the value of out file pass variable. So you can see it contains the result pass to our output file, and this one is based on our expression we specified in the macro arguments. So when we click save as, the operation is successful, and we can just inspect the output, and you can see there is an IGES file created in the nominated folder with a nominated naming. All the heavy loading of resolving the file name has been handled by Cut+, and we now have this advanced functionality without much complicating the source code of our VBA macro. Let's make further improvements. So firstly, I want to output our files into the subfolder called MFGs. So let's just type that subfolder name in here. So it's very simple, MFGs. So now it's going to be output into subfolder MFGs, but also Macro+ allows multiple arguments to be passed to the macro. So I can just simply copy my previous argument, paste it, and change an extension. So now we can see there are all two arguments, first for IGES, second for step, and I'm expecting the macro to produce two files when I click that button. So let's just click OK, and let's just modify our macro. In order to export multiple files as per our arguments list, we simply need to introduce a simple for loop and iterate over our arguments and call the save as API as many times as our arguments and pass the corresponding argument value to each instance of save as API call. So you can see here I can just copy paste that operation over here. So I can just extract the value of argument, and instead of calling the first argument by 0 index, we're going to call I, so it's going to get value of argument in a loop. We can remove debug asset as we no longer want to break our code and restart SOLIDWORKS to apply the changes. We can now click export button, and after a few seconds you can see there are two files produced in the MFG subfolder as per our arguments. If we want to automate this procedure, we can use the triggers in Toolbar Plus. So let's just enable this macro to run every time we save the model. So for that, we simply need to select Save Document Trigger, restart SOLIDWORKS to apply changes, and test our code by saving the document. We can clear our output folder, and instead of clicking the Export button, we're going to click Save button in SOLIDWORKS. And you can see two files have been automatically produced. Macro Plus provides even more features for macro developers, so sometimes you might want to create your own placeholder and resolve it within the macro to produce some naming, and also sometimes you want to provide an output to users from what your macro have done. So if your macro exporting files, you might want to let the user know that those files have been exported and those files have been, let's say, failed to export. Let me demonstrate that functionality to you in action. I'm going to add new macro into my toolbar, which allows to export individual bodies from your SOLIDWORKS part document into the foreign formats. I will configure the macro in a very similar way, provide title, description, and icon. And just to save some typing, I'm going to copy arguments from my export macro and paste it in my export bodies macro and do some modifications. As we're going to export individual bodies, the description part number will be the same for all of those bodies, so we need to differentiate those somehow. And for that, we're going to use a custom placeholder here called body name. So the value of the body is going to be resolved within the macro itself. So I just need to type a body name, and I can just copy that placeholder and paste it into my second argument. Let's now configure the behavior of our macro. So it's going to be run on the button. It is available in part and assembly, and it's going to be in toolbar, tab box, and a menu. And I'm also going to check this display result, and we'll show you in a moment what it means. So now we just need to restart our SOLIDWORKS. Now we have new button added toolbar. We can click on export bodies command, and after a few seconds we'll see a pop-up in the right bottom corner with the result of the operation. So you can see 40 files were processed, some of them failed, perhaps because of the name, or maybe the geometry cannot be exported by some reasons. This results pop-up is driven by display results toggle, which we have enabled in a previous step. In addition to VBA macros, Macro Plus supports .NET macros in C# or VB.NET, because those languages are more sophisticated and allow us to perform some additional operation much easier than the VBA macro would. So for example, if we want to create a zip archive from our files, it will be much easier to do in .NET than in VBA. So let me demonstrate you another example. I'm just going to add a macro which allows you to export files and zip it into a single zip archive. I will need to follow exact same steps to add my macro in the toolbar. So I can just browse to my zip macro. I need to select XHUD macro filter, select zip export, and you can see that .NET macros can actually contain icon and description and title embedded into them. In a similar way, I can configure the parameters. The first argument of that macro is the name of our zip file. So for example, we're going to create a zip in the MFG subfolder and name it after the file name. And the consecutive arguments are just the files I want to include into my zip. So let's create a PDF file and put it into the subfolder called PDFs in the zip step file, and we can add more if we want. We can also configure the behavior. Now we can click OK and restart SOLIDWORKS, so our button is added to a toolbar and we can test it. So you can see there is a zip export now in our toolbar. Click on zip export, and just after a few seconds we can see there is a result with one file, which is a path to the zip file. So let's take a look at this zip. So just a single file, and you can see there is a PDF in the PDF subfolder and step file within step subfolder as a part of the zip archive produced by the macro. Despite I showing you VBA macros and .NET macros in C#, which use completely different languages and completely different frameworks, the user experience is exactly the same. So we can pass arguments, we can add macros on a toolbar, macros can have icon, and they can display the results. But there is also another great feature of Macro Plus, as it not only can be run within the part of Toolbar Plus, but can also be run in the batch mode in Batch Plus integrated into Assembly, Batch Plus standalone, and Batch Plus for SOLIDWORKS PDM. And let me show you that in action. As a part of this demonstration, I will show how to produce a single zip file of PDF and DWG files from all drawings used by all components in this assembly. We will start by adding exact same zip export macro we just used in Toolbar Plus. I'm just going to supply the argument to that. So I'm just going to specify the output folder. So in this case, I'm just going to hardcode the output folder to be the MFGs, and I can specify the flexible name, or I can just use a hardcoded name. So in my case, mfgs1.zip, and here I can just specify the files I want to output. So it's going to be PDF, and just going to use the file name as the name of PDF. I'm just also going to output the DWG to the DWG subfolders, and this is going to be within the zip file itself. So now I just need to have a few more options. So as I said, I want to export drawings, so I'm just going to check the option to find drawing and also to make it open them read-only, because I don't need to save those drawings. So here I have a dialog where all the drawings have been found, so I can just select those drawings into the scope, and Batch Plus is going to process all of those files and produce the result. And you can see the output is very similar to what you see in Toolbar. It's actually showing you what files have been produced but what macro. So our zip export producing one zip file, which is going to be shared across all of the SOLIDWORKS drawings. The process now complete, so we can see that zip file have been created, and we can see there are 3 DWG files and 3 PDFs files within that archive, which correspond to the export for all drawings used in this assembly. We can also run this macro from the standalone version of Batch Plus if you, for example, want to process all files within the folder. So let's create a new Batch Plus job. I'm just going to drop the folder into our scope. So this is the folder we want to process. I can specify the extensions of the files I want to process. So let's just export SOLIDWORKS part files. We can also drag and drop or add the macro to our scope. So we can just go to macros, zip export, and just drag and drop exact same DL file I just used in Batch Plus integrated and Toolbar Plus. So to save some typing, I'm just going to copy the arguments from my Toolbar Plus macro. I'm just going to paste those arguments into the Batch Plus. And let me just modify the first argument. So I'm just going to specify the output folder to be hard-coded. So here, and just copy that. And just change our first argument, and let's just call that zip file something like mfgs2.zip. We can configure our batch job, so let's go to settings, let's use SOLIDWORKS 2023, let's open it in the background, read only, as we don't want to modify our files, and after we complete our setup, we can click run to start the batch job. Batch Plus will find all SOLIDWORKS part files as per our filter and create a single zip file as per our macro. So you can see there are 9 files, all of them have been successfully processed, and we now have a single mfgs2 zip which has 9 PDF files and 9 step files in them. Now let me show you how the same macro could be integrated in SOLIDWORKS PDM Professional. New version of Cut Plus Premium will have an integration of Batch Plus and Export Plus with SOLIDWORKS PDM Professional, and you can create SOLIDWORKS PDM tasks as a part of your workflow in SOLIDWORKS PDM Professional. Let's create a new PDM task in SOLIDWORKS PDM Administration. Select Batch Plus. Now you can specify the name, so let's call it zip. You can assign the execution method. Let's run it on this machine. So you can optionally create a context menu if you want to run this task from the context menu in the Explorer. You can configure the options such as SOLIDWORKS version and some startup options. Filters, so this is very similar to what you can do in a standalone version of Batch Plus. You can also add macro, so we just need to add our zip macro into the vault, and we can simply browse and add it into our task. This process is very similar to our previous steps, and we also have a placeholders, but I want to point your attention that in SOLIDWORKS PDM we have a different set of placeholders. We have a placeholders for revision, version, variable value, and some of the vault specific paths. So let's output it into the files folder under the MFGs, and we're going to use a version placeholder to actually assign the name to our file based on the version of its file. And here we can just specify what files we want to include in our zip. So it will be PDF, and I'm going to put a file name of that file, and also it's going to be extension to PDF. And let's create another one, and this one is going to be step. So we're also going to use a file name placeholder. So I want to create a zip archive which will contain a PDF and steps of all our input files. So click on that. So now let's go to output. So here we can automatically check in the generated file, provide the message. We can also transfer some variable from our input file to our output file. We can also use the placeholders to build that value. We can also configure our resilience, and we can enable the advanced log. So you can just need to specify the folder where our log file should be saved. Because this is a task in PDM, you can easily integrate it into the workflow. So let's automatically run this task whenever we pass the approval in our workflow. So let's add action, execute task, select zip task from our list, and give it a name. Now let's go to our PDM vault. Before that, we need to save our workflow. And here I have few files which you can move through the transition. We can run this task manually from the context menu, or we can just change the state for our files, and then the workflow will automatically start that task. So let's open the task list. You can see the task already there, waiting for host. Now when connection with host has been established, you can see there is a SOLIDWORKS popping up and our process has started. Of course, you can run this on the remote task machine as well. So you can see the progress, and after a few seconds you will see the result. So our job has been successfully processed. You can click on details to see more information about this task. You can also go to journal and to see a very detailed report, very similar to what you see in batch plus standalone or integrated versions. And let's go to our vault. You can see there is a new zip file checked into the vault, and we can see what is inside that file by clicking on the preview. So you can see there is a PDF and step files created in this zip file using the batch plus and run automatically from the PDM workflow. This version of Cut Plus is currently in private alpha and will be available as public beta very soon. The sample macros used in this video can be downloaded from GitHub repository. Follow the link in the description. Thank you for watching this video.